Lunch with Brad. Lunch with Brad. Come on, Matt. I know you love it. Lunch with Brad.
I mean, even John has given up at this point.
Lunch with Brad. That is right. It's Thursday. It's lunchtime. That means it is time for Lunch with Brad. I know you missed it. Took a little bit of time off. It's summertime, regroup. But we're back. We're back at it. I got a couple buddies on the show you might recognize. We'll get to that in just a minute. But this is episode 6 of Lunch with Brad. This is the podcast, a bi-weekly podcast that we live stream with video on YouTube. And we talk about web and technology and anything else that sounds interesting and fun that we want to talk about on the show. So you can get involved. Just check the Lunch with Brad hashtag. Shoot me a tweet. Check us out on maybe even Facebook and some other networks. Just look for Lunch with Brad. Send your topics, your opinions, your suggestions, your feedback, your hate mail. We love it all. And maybe there's been some recommendations that we should allow callers. So maybe we'll just start allowing anyone to pop on here and drop some knowledge.
You better learn how to set a delay, especially in this community.
No, we like it live. We like it raw, rough. So let's dive in, guys. We got some fun stuff to talk about. So we have two of my good buddies on this show, and they actually have both been on this show. They're my solid, like, hey, I don't have anyone scheduled this week. Can you come on last minute, guys? So I'll let you do your own introductions. But John, why don't you tell everyone who you are?
Hey now, John Hawkins. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the web at Vegas Geek, vegasgeek.com and whatnot. I get the lovely opportunity of working with Brad on a regular basis too over at Webman Studios.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
Yes, sir. I allow John to stop working for an hour just to come on my podcast.
So I do like the fact that we're at episode 6 and I've been on twice. So my goal is to just keep it at that 1/3 ratio.
1/3. That is that is a very likely goal, since the organizing the podcast and getting guests lined up early is got to be one of the most challenging things in the world. Like, it doesn't sound like it would be hard, but it just sneaks up on you. So if you don't do it early and often, next thing you know, it's podcast day and you have no one lined up.
I'm doing that right now for my other podcast.
It's how it works.
27 emails. So yeah, I get it.
We are not all as professional as my next friend, Mr. Matt Medeiros of the Matt Report, who has about 15 different podcasts under his brand. But Matt, please introduce yourself.
But 2.5 podcasts running right now, but you can find me at mattreport.com as my side hustle. And you can find me at the day job at pagely.com.
Yes, sir, Pagely.
Nice 1 year recap. I'm starting to hash out the details because I can't believe it's actually been a year since I've been.
Really?
Yeah. Since I've been working. Speaking of crazy bosses, working for Josh Strebel.
Josh, you're on my short list, Josh. I got to reach out if I actually plan ahead far enough and not try to ask you the night before. So Pagely, a great company. Actually, my recliner has a Pagely blanket on it, which I use almost every night. So. My nighttime TV watching is somewhat sponsored by Pagely.
So what you're saying is we cuddle every night. That's very pleasant.
I'm closer to you guys than you realize. I can promise you that. Well, thank you both for coming on. And the reason I actually reached out to both of you is this topic that's kind of been swirling around a little bit more recently, and it's been around for a few years. But and the topic is really about the WordPress economy. And how it's changing, or has it changed, and what's going on. And the reason I think you both are great guests on the show is because you have a lot of experience with WordPress, obviously, but not only from the services space, client services space, but also from the product space. So we got products, we got client services. Hell, we even got hosting, like, Pagely being 100% managed WordPress host. So all three of us have a lot of experience really in all the realms of various, having our fingers in various areas of the WordPress economy. And I think we all have, I would imagine we're having, some various experiences over the past few years. And what we've seen, especially compared to, the golden age of WordPress, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, when it was just, growing gangbusters and people were scrambling to figure out how they could get on WordPress as fast and quickly as possible and just throwing money at it. And now we're seeing these discussions that are starting to happen a little bit more often about things are changing. WordPress just celebrated its 15th anniversary. So it's been around 15 years, which in the realm of tech, I guess it is getting older, but it's still relatively young, right? Right. I mean, I guess 15 years in the grand scheme of the internet now is starting to look like a bigger chunk of that. But it is still, in terms of mass adoption, I think still, somewhat young. So let's dive into it, guys. I really want to, there's a lot to kind of unpack here. There's a lot of different directions we can go. And being the super ultra planner that I am, I have like 4 bullet points, which cover maybe about 2% of where we could go with this. But I kind of want to open it up and say, I guess the first question is, just in a general sense, is the WordPress economy changing? Have you guys seen a change of any significance that you think is different than it was maybe a few years ago?
I can start it off. I put out a tweet the other day because I wanted to do a sort of little video series on this, or at least some interviews around the topic. And I get some interesting responses. I think that, from the end user perspective, a lot of the feedback that I got was, boy, we've got this whole like page building experience that's starting to change, in terms of like third-party plugins, versus a Gutenberg integrated solution. And then there were some responses on sort of the small business versus the enterprise space, right? There's a lot of stuff. And I think actually Jody from your team, Brad, had mentioned that there's a pretty good, or at least visible line between where WordPress fits in from the small business, where it fits in from the enterprise, and I'm assuming where it doesn't fit in. For me, now a year into working at Pagely and seeing WordPress from a different perspective, number one, from a web host, but number two, because of our client base, much more like enterprise and big business, I see the adoption, at least from my perspective, greater at the, enterprise and larger business space, being just a better vantage for WordPress at that level, right? At least the conversations that I have, people are sick of paying, Adobe, right, ridiculous amounts of money for their CMS and Sitecore and like all of these sort of big, behemoth CMSs. The enterprise is finally catching up to what we were all talking about 5-6 years ago to the small and medium business, like, break away from commercial-based CMS and get this open source thing. We can do anything we want with it. I see, at least my perspective, enterprise finally catching up to that. Bigger businesses finally catching up to that and adopting this technology a little bit more. Drill back down into the WordPress product space, into that space where we all live and some of the listeners live. I don't see as many people hyped up about it anymore. I'm the type of guy that sort of just like looks at things from a 50,000 foot view, and I just consume what I feel is the overall response from a market. And again, 5-6 years ago, people were like, look how much money we're making. We're printing money in plugins, right? There's 15 different ways to make plugins and to sell plugins. I don't feel that anymore, right? It's really just a gut feeling for me, just talking to a lot of people. And I feel like a lot of people in the product space are starting to go the traditional SaaS route way, or even the more traditional way of, I'm not going to talk about my business as much as I used to. I'm not going to put everything out on the table anymore because we do have to tighten our belts a little bit. And maybe the whole, like, we help everybody competitive thing is coming back around where, BMW is not going to tell Mercedes what they're building, for the next engine, right? So I'm starting to see a little bit of that creep out. All the while, I believe the innovation and hype, the dialogue around that is now pivoting to Gutenberg and to WordPress. And we're starting to see that drive come much more from the WordPress side, if you will, versus the cool third-party plugin that was making WordPress do something really cool before, and everybody rallied around it and was like, this is awesome, third-party plugin, rah, rah, rah. So now that conversation is much more, well, look what WordPress is doing now. That might not make sense. If that's a little cloudy, I can expand upon it. But I just feel like the whole dialogue now is being driven by the core, not the core team of WordPress, but the core of WordPress. Not in core as we know it, but as people might perceive it. So I just threw a lot out there in all different areas. We can go any direction you see fit.
Yeah, I think, you definitely have an interesting perspective, like you said, not only from the host standpoint, which is really insightful. Of course, like you said, Pagely focuses more on kind of those larger brands, maybe the enterprise side of the house. Not really the small business or kind of maybe blogger side of the house, right? So not only from that perspective, but also from your podcast, like you said, you talk to a lot of people, and this isn't just like informal, a couple tweets back and forth. Like you're interviewing people, a lot of people, and especially from the business angle of WordPress. And if you haven't checked it out, we mentioned it, but mattreport.com. Always a really insightful podcast because you are kind of drilling into people in the business world all over in different assets or different facets of that business, specifically around like WordPress. So I definitely think you bring a good perspective to that because you are talking to people that are doing everything from small to large to middle, whatever, across all sorts of different services.
Yeah. And I really, I hate to use it's an interesting time, but everybody says it's an interesting time, and it is. I totally get it.
Every time. Time.
Yeah, but it's definitely a growth phase for WordPress. And I think, again, just having boots on the ground and in my local WordPress meetup that I run, like a lot of the local consultants, they're like, I don't even give WordPress as an option anymore. Right. And these are consultants that aren't in it neck deep like we all are, like tweeting back and forth and tuning into podcast, WordPress podcasts. People just trying to make a living, trying to just do a decent job, day's work, worth of work. And they say, if there's a customer that comes to me and it's just an ultralight website, it's just Squarespace or Wix. They're not even bringing WordPress to the table anymore. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that's because WordPress core itself has lacked, and again, WordPress, the app itself, hasn't had a Gutenberg experience, and all these other competitors have sort of won in that area. I don't know. I think we'll see that roll out as Gutenberg rolls out. But a lot of people are just like, you know what? $9 a month, I'm just going to go to Squarespace for my clients. It's just so much easier for me to manage. So we're all in this growth period right now, I think.
And John, you obviously have a lot of experience as well. Like you mentioned, you work at Web Dev Studios now, but back in the day, you ran your own agency. Yep. You've also had a number of products over the years that you've built, some free, some premium. So from your perspective, I mean, where are we at? Are we in an interesting time, as Matt would say? Are things changing?
So I also run the WordPress meetup here in Vegas, and we actually had a meetup last night. And for the meetup, I wanted to do a presentation where I kind of talked about 3 different plugins that all do the exact same thing. It doesn't matter what the plugins are. So I did some research, installed 3 of them. 2 of them were free plugins that were available in the repo, and one of them was actually just a straight up for-pay premium plugin from a company. And the experience in the WordPress repo with plugins, any plugin that is going to be of any reasonable size does here you go, here's the free version, and oh, by the way, you want fries with that, here's the link to go pay over here. When I was doing this research last night, one of the plugins was just complete crap. One of the plugins that was free basically did almost the exact same thing that the for-pay one did right out of the box. I think of the idea of just kind of starting up a plugin business and kind of making that the thing that you do. I just don't see that. I mean, I don't, unless you're somebody like, the Pippins in the world where you've already got this kind of pre-built audience and they've been kind of at it for a while. I think breaking into it at this point is going to be very tough. We have I've always talked about this whole 2 sides of the fence. You've got that inside the WordPress community, guys like us, we're talking WordPress, we're on WordPress podcasts, we know what's going on in core, blah, blah, blah. People that go to WordPress meetups, et cetera. Like there's that side of things, and you can sell to that side of folks, but only a little bit. It's really that other side of the fence. And so, Matt, when you talk about those small sites where you're not even going to consider WordPress, I get it. At the end of the day, people aren't really looking for, people who need a website don't necessarily care about the solution. They care about what they need to get done. That's it. They don't care how you get it done. Just get it done. So, yeah, I think SaaS products are going to be. There's definitely the way. I mean, I see that's going to be the, if you kind of want to do this, that's kind of what you need to be.
I mean, everybody knows recurring income, right?
Yeah.
The one-off, pay me once for a lifetime license, that doesn't scale at all. No. Every company that has done that has eventually changed their model, at least in the product space around WordPress specifically. Like everyone that I've seen that is still around and a really big product and doing well, has implemented some type of a SaaS, continue to pay us ongoing, your yearly license, 6-month license, whatever that looks like, for that residual income.
Well, you have to. You're just not going to be able to pay somebody to run support for something that you got paid $19 for back in 1987. I mean, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'd argue that I'd argue that it's not that it's impossible anymore. It's just going to be a lot harder.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's going to be harder to grow as big. I mean, at the end of the day, you can still have a successful business doing that, but wouldn't you rather make more money?
Well, it's not even, I don't think it's necessarily just about making more money, but I think it's the ability to make enough money that you can kind of pursue additional things, rather than just having one thing and that is the thing that's just kind of hanging on and keeping you moving forward, versus having enough money coming in to where you can go, you know what, we are going to bring in some additional resources and we're going to go try this other thing that is freaking crazy, may not even work. But you wouldn't be able to do that unless you had enough money coming in from those, like a SaaS product, that thing, to even fund that idea. So,
and going back to a point you were kind of making, Matt, around the usage of WordPress, whether on the small business side or the people using WordPress on a personal level. A lot of those people, or even some of those people, maybe not even a lot, it's hard to know the exact numbers, but they're looking at other options like a Squarespace or a Wix. Or maybe even a different option if blogging is their goal, like a Medium, up against WordPress. Like you said, those are very low cost, easy, sites you can literally dive right in and start building your site, and away you go in a matter of hours. And is WordPress catching up? Yes, I believe it is with the page builder market, but it's still not quite as easy as just saying, here's $10 a month. Everything's already set up on the hosting side. Everything's ready to go, and I can just focus on building out my site here. There's still that level of effort that if you're not using something like WordPress.com, that comes with using WordPress. And we'd like to, I think, being in that WordPress bubble, it's very easy for us to forget that WordPress is as easy as we think it is. It's not the most intuitive thing in the world. Like telling someone, hey, go to WordPress.org. I mean, Matt, I know you're involved in your meetup. I'm involved in the Philly meetup, and John, you down over in Vegas. It's not easy. If we took, a normal meetup member and said, hey, show me how you would set up a WordPress site and launch it, and build out a nice site, how long do you think it would take them? A long time, probably.
Yeah. And, I think it's important that folks, I love WordPress. Like as much as I criticize some of the direction we go as a non-developer, just as a business sort of marketing and end user of WordPress, I think it's absolutely critical that everybody should have a WordPress site, because we want to own that content. We want to own that experience. I mean, the high level conversations I have with some of the clients that come to Pagely is, holy shit, Facebook has just crushed our publishing business, right? They're changing their algorithm. And when did we hear that? We heard that, 6 years ago when Google changed theirs, right? With taking data away from analytics and how people could do SEO, and they continue to do it today. People invest in these platforms and they're locked in. I think one of the great things about WordPress, obviously, is that it's open source. But what they've always suffered as, from a business perspective and just growing, continue to grow adoption, is the experience of WordPress has never been smooth for anybody. Brad, you mentioned, is WordPress gaining? It's certainly making its strides, with Gutenberg being in there as the builder, and then Jetpack as that monetization layer to say, hey, don't want to think about installing plugins or want plugins from a trusted source. Jetpack does everything for you, and that's the play. Gutenberg plus Jetpack equals success for the business. But second to that is the experience. Right? The experience of WordPress, much like Android being fragmented across 1,000 different OEMs, and Google never having that pure experience like iOS has, but iOS is only available on their hardware, on Apple's hardware. To me, this is the same kind of play from a layman's perspective.
And WordPress, in terms of usage, is growing. Like the overall stat backing up the fact that, I think it just crossed 31% usage of the top, 10 million sites or whatever. So basically it's powering, 30% of the mostly used internet. So from that perspective, it's growing, but that doesn't always translate into the economy of WordPress growing, right? And that's what I think people are starting to discuss more. And to be quite frank, like, this is not an easy thing to admit if you're in the business of WordPress. And I think that's why people have tiptoed around it a little bit in the past year or so. Because the last thing you want to go out there and publicly say when your entire company is based on WordPress is that, things are changing, things are slowing down, or maybe they're not. Maybe it's just in terms of how we look and work and sell WordPress, that's what's changing. We have to evolve with it. But it's a hard thing to come to terms with. But if you don't come to terms with the fact that something's changing, that's when you get past, and that's when you run into some really big problems. So that's why I have been talking about this a little bit, and I think it's an interesting conversation. So that stands out for me. WordPress has continued to grow in terms of usage, but it's not necessarily translating to the economy side of it.
Something that's hit me real visually on the change in the WordPress landscape is I was at WordCamp Orange County this past weekend or the weekend before. I can't remember.
It's always a great camp.
Oh man, so good. The host, not the host, I'm sorry, but the sponsors that were there, it was literally a who's who of hosting companies. So if you go back like a year or two, you've got dev agencies, web dev studios. We sponsored a whole bunch of them, things like that. And I saw way less of that and way more of most of the top named hosting companies. And I mean, I think that right there is kind of a little bit of a visual on the change that's going on, where somebody, the ROI for a small business trying to go to a WordCamp and pluck out a $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 client is probably gone, like that, or slim. Yeah. But for somebody like a hosting company that they can go drop some discount codes and pick up 5, 10, 15 users for life makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and honestly, I think part of that, in my opinion, is to the growth of WordPress, right? Because I mean, back in the day, we used to sponsor a lot of camps every year, but we were sponsoring them at like $250 a pop or $500 a pop, and now, I mean, most camps, to get even a link on the site is like $1,000 or $2,000. It's like, that's hard to justify, especially if you're not going to have anyone from your team at that camp, right? Yeah. So, I think with the growth of WordPress has also come, things like sponsorships. There's a bigger ask for the sponsorship, the size of the sponsorship. And you're right, it's hard to turn, to basically get the return on investment, especially for like an agency. Like, am I going to sponsor WordCamp and walk away with a client that wants a $50,000 website? Probably not. Like, that's not going to happen, but hosting, like you said, quick signups, maybe even products. If you can get, a few people buying into your product, but again, that ROI, it's when the initial investment is in the thousands of dollars, it's more of a challenge.
Yeah. And God forbid you had to travel to go to a WordCamp to be involved as well. So,
I think people are just, in my opinion, and I'll kind of tell you how I've seen this on our side at Web Dev Studios. I really saw a big change in the economy around at the beginning of 2016. The first half of 2016 was miserable. Like, stuff just stopped coming in the door, and we could not figure out why. And I started talking to my friends that have companies and agencies, and they were seeing the exact same thing and saying, I don't know why either, but things are slowing down. And that's when it became very eye-opening to me that what has worked in the past is not going to continue to work going forward. We can't just sit back and expect, all these amazing brands and products just to walk in the door. Like, sometimes they will, but there is zero guarantee. Like, back in the heyday of WordPress, it seemed like that, like you said, Matt, people were just throwing money at everything, almost like the .com start, bubble. Like, they just needed to be in the WordPress scene or on WordPress because that's what everybody was doing. Right. And then it seemed like, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened, but the few things I have been able to identify is it was definitely around the beginning of 2016. It seemed to be certainly more US focused than overseas. The companies I talked to, some saw slowdowns, but I don't think it was anything like in the US. I mean, I know companies that went out of business because of this, in 2016. And one area that I do think affected it, I think, was the election. And that's a tough one to say. The US election definitely caused this, but going back historically and looking at numbers and talking to other people who have been around way longer than Web Dev Studios even, there was always a slowdown right after a U.S. election, regardless of who was elected and what the campaign went like. There was always a slowdown because there's this uncertainty, of what's going to happen. And the weirdest part of it was like the U.S. economy was doing great at the time. I'm like, they're talking about all these jobs being made, all this money out there. And I'm like, why aren't we seeing it? It was an odd time. Now things have definitely rebounded in some areas, but again, we don't take anything for granted. We have completely changed our strategy because I think we are a little bit naive in that sense that, this is going to continue the way it is forever. And that's just not true. And that was silly on our part. So, from my perspective, things have changed. So I've been very more aware of it. I've talked to a lot more people since then. A lot of people have seen this, and this is not just a WordPress thing either. I have a buddy that runs a big Drupal agency by me, and they saw the exact same thing happen in Drupal as well. So I think it was more of a web issue. I don't know if it was open source or what, but that was kind of my perspective of when this thing started to really change, was right around that time.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, but I would just imagine that there's no other, well, maybe I shouldn't say there's no other industry, but we are in such a infancy stage of having this collection of software that somebody can use as a tool to build a livelihood and to build a business. And there's no pattern for that yet to like look back and say, this is what's going to happen in 20 years. This is what's going to happen in 40 years. You can probably look to the printing press, right, for some of this stuff, and maybe some old school industrial areas. But how much of it is the evolution of the digital age, where now companies are just getting much more savvy? Instead of outsourcing, they're hiring people. These infrastructure is much more of a commodity price point. This software is free. And the investment that people can put into it versus paying Oracle or Microsoft is a fraction, and they'll just run it in-house. So I don't know how much of it's just the market maturing and being educated.
I think that's a good part of it.
I think it's just this perfect storm of things.
Yeah.
I'm very interested, as I wrote a piece a while ago, I don't even remember when, about the blue collar digital worker. And I'm just like, when I criticize WordPress, it's because I feel anyway, I'm sort of trying to stick up for the 1 or 2 person shop or the solo digital product creator who's just trying to make an honest living. And, with the introductions of Gutenberg, I think a lot of people had started their development agencies and practice around WordPress because it was accessible to them. They could skip a whole bunch of stuff by deploying WordPress, and they could learn how to develop and code for the web because of WordPress. And now they've sort of elevated their game. They're a lot smarter. They've learned how to code well. They've got great practices in place. And they see the incoming changes of WordPress and saying, you know what? I don't need all this anymore. Like I know I've leveled up. WordPress has become a springboard for me to get better at this technology game. I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use another, open source tool or collection of tools to do it my own way. And I think we're going to see that moving forward once Gutenberg rolls out. I know I've talked to a few people who are like, this is not for me. I'm looking at I'm looking at Laravel now, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess it's sort of that same kind of thing where 10 years ago, people were like, WordPress, no way. But then people started to flock to WordPress, and before you knew it, it just grew to this massive thing. And I think what we'll see is a little bit of that shrink away, but eventually expand. But other projects will start to expand, Laravel being one of them. Again, I'm not a developer. I just know that a lot of people are flocking to that for building web apps and other pieces of software. So, the smaller shop, the freelancer, I think they're going to start to look at alternatives. Maybe fall back to WordPress as another tool and just use it as a tool, but not just be as passionate about it in the future.
The technology hurdle now, like you mentioned, as someone that, even a few years ago, well, still today, I guess, to a certain extent, but like when I got into WordPress, like I think a lot of people, they set it up, you throw on a theme that's free, you start, and if you're a dev or you want to kind of get under the hood, you start just kind of hacking away at it, right? You open up theme files, you understand the basics of how a plugin runs, you start hacking away at Hello Dolly or some other plugin, you know what I mean? And by all accounts, with, you know, basic HTML markup and PHP and CSS, it's pretty easy to get in there and make the changes you want to make without being an advanced developer, right? Without being an advanced level developer. Now, I think Gutenberg is starting to scare some people, because now you're getting into some pretty decent JavaScript and looking at things like React. And the question is that people are asking themselves, I'm sure, that are building sites is, okay, is this the direction I want to go? Am I going to go all in with React and JavaScript and really understand how to work with this framework, or not? Maybe I'll stick with page builders and hope that they do what I need them to do. Or like you said, maybe I'll jump ship. I mean, Gutenberg is going to have a major impact on WordPress, for better or worse, right? And there are so many unknowns about it, because WordPress has never seen a feature this large being developed kind of in parallel with the core that we know is coming, and we know it's getting merged, and we know it's happening. It's never happened before on a framework that powers 30% of the internet, which has never happened before either. So there's all these unknowns and uncertainty that, to be quite frank, I think Gutenberg could end up hurting the economy if I mean, depending on how it lands. If Gutenberg comes out and blows up, you know, even a fraction of the websites it's on, guess who gets the black eye? WordPress. WordPress is unstable. It's broken. It's shitty, and that's going to hurt.
You will never see. I mean, I guess we'll go on record. June 21st, 2018, on Lunch with Brad, bet $100 that you'll never see a white label feature for Gutenberg Jetpack combination, right? And I think that all the stuff that you mentioned was really powerful for people who were entry-level developers to use some plugins and tools that had sort of these white label features where you could kind of hide the fact that this was, you know, powered by Beaver Builder, powered by Gravity Forms, and you sort of hid that stuff. Didn't want your client to see it. The client thought you were super, you know, intelligent. Not that you're not, but you put all these tools in place. You didn't want them to see the underpinnings of all this stuff. And that was very empowering, I think, for the freelancer economy, you know, for the last, whatever, decade. But that type of stuff is scary to some people, because now it's just like, oof, boy, I'm going into this. I'm going to deploy a site for somebody. If I start using these Gutenberg and Jetpack tools, I know there will always be this upsell to another feature there. And that's a big, you know, that's a big anxiety for some people to think that their customer can go in and start tinkering things and buying things at will, or modifying things at will without them be able to control that, right? Which is another aspect of white labeling. Typically in the WordPress world, in white label products, you can shut things off. So the customer, so the customers can't touch it. Will we have that? I don't know how it all evolves. I'm sure somebody will make a plugin to do it, but
I sure hope so. Every demo of Gutenberg you see, and even on stage, when people are just kind of, oh, this is what it can do, and they start clicking around, inevitably they end up with a like puke green background and like red text, and it's like, it's like, okay, so this is the demo, and I understand what they're showing. It's like you can do pretty much whatever you want, right? But that's part of the problem too. You can do whatever you want.
So to resurface the age-old debate, does the implementation of Gutenberg just fortify WordPress as a site builder moving forward, and no longer a content management system proper, or a blogging system proper?
It could. How many years have we been trying to shed the blogging label of WordPress? And we're still, by all accounts, still trying to shed it. You see articles on TechCrunch, whatever, and they mention it's a blogging platform to this day, you know, 15 years later. So if we basically roll out Gutenberg and it's like, okay, it's just kind of a drag and drop. This is like a Wix or a Squarespace. It is not enterprise grade. This is not kind of professional level software. That's going to be a big problem for a lot of companies out there.
You know, you talked about people kind of hiding the fact that they were using X or Y or whatever as part of their site build. And I think of our industry, developers in general. I mean, I think we've all had those clients come to us who have, you know, oh man, my last developer did all this crazy crap and I'm stuck with it and I don't know what they did. And, you know, unfortunately, I think a lot of developers and maybe even some, you know, small dev shops, they build projects with the idea of kind of locking in a client to always need to come back to them for every single thing that they need. Oh, you want to make one change on a website? No problem. 2 hours. I'm going to bill you for it, and away you go. And, you know, as we move more towards this kind of page builder Gutenberg version, that kind of goes out the door. You can, for somebody, a small business, like you can build them a site over the course of a couple of weeks, let's say. And once that's done, unless they really either don't want to do it themselves, don't want to learn just some of the basics of moving stuff around with a page builder, there is that possibility that client comes to you, you get one purchase out of them, and then that's it. You're done. You never hear from them again. And I think that can be scary for freelancers or small development shops who that's kind of what they rely on, getting that one client in and just billing a couple of hours a month from now till the end of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where this, I think to your point, John, support and maintenance, like can that be completely eliminated to the point where they don't need, at the very least, somebody that's knowledgeable, that when they click update a plugin or click update WordPress, if something blows up, they know what they're doing. I'm not saying they won't think they can do that, but can they,
yeah.
And does a page builder turn you into a designer? No,
it doesn't turn me into a designer, because I tried to do the Lunch with Brad website. It's built in Beaver Builder, right? Because I want to play around with it. And I got the general structure how I wanted it and basically could not make it look pretty. I just do not have that design eye. Like, I can look at something and tell you if it looks good or not, but I can't tell you how to get to that point. Yeah. So I had to have Lisa Sava Wilson come in and rescue my button design like she always does. And like 30 minutes later, it looked great. And I was like, that's just, the problem is a page builder does not make you a designer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like threads of thought. So I just did a video on, it's titled "My Web Developers Ripping Me Off." And it's sort of about this topic too, where I think freelancers, web developers who are just starting off their business, they like that lock-in because it's this whole like knowledge is power kind of play, knowledge is profitable kind of play, where like, I know how to do this and I can turn this into a service. And that's awesome. I think whatever, go ahead and do it. But you have to be able to tell a customer where your limits stop. Right. I think a lot of people just get themselves neck deep into things when they're just trying to go after the almighty dollar from that customer, but they also feel sort of, that they don't want to look stupid, right? They don't want to look foolish. The customer says, "Can you do this?" And there's like, yeah, there's that bravado. Of course I can do this. I'm going to go get this plugin and I'm going to do it for you. And they're sort of afraid to say that they can't. They're not sure what that's going to do to the relationship. Whereas if you're honest and tell them, "No, you have now asked me for something that is above my pay grade." If you were honest and said, "Hey, there's Web Dev Studios, they can do it for you. Great company, bigger agency, they can do this." That's a perfect way to create a relationship.
Yep.
It doesn't. Now, I will just a counterpoint to that. I don't think it's always a bad thing to take on something maybe you haven't done or aren't familiar with. But what we did early on when we were smaller and taking on things that we truly didn't know how to do, we would be open with the client about that and say, "Look, this is going to be new for us. I'm confident we can figure this out, but we've never done it. So guess what? Yeah. We'll do it for a reduced rate. Just, but there's going to be a bit of a learning curve for us here. And we negotiate what that rate is. Maybe it's, half your hourly rate or 10% off or whatever that is. But we were very transparent. Like, this is going to take us longer because we've never done it before. But we'll work through this together. Right. And that almost every time that worked.
There's this other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, especially as it pertains to my plugin Conductor. And I'd like to challenge some people who are listening to this who are thinking like, what am I going to do in this Gutenberg world? Should I just be Gutenberg compatible and just go all in on that? Totally depends on what your business is. Totally depends on what you want to do. But there are companies. So let me back up, give you the context. So Conductor, we're talking about, hey, how do we make it work in Gutenberg? Okay, so we're figuring that out right now. But then we talked about, do we get rid of the traditional panel that you go to in the admin and build your query there and get the short code? And the answer to that is we're going to leave that, right? Sounds like super surface level, no big deal. But I think a lot of people are just going to try to invest everything into Gutenberg. They're like, here's the next big thing. Let's just try to do everything inside of Gutenberg. And my thing is, I think there's going to be a lot of traditional ways of doing things that people will still value and pay for. There's a headphone company called Grado Labs, GRADOLABS.com. They build headphones out of Brooklyn and they're handmade. They're not Beats. They're not doing, crazy wireless stuff. They don't have athlete sponsors. It's a company that's been family owned for 60 plus years, building headphones by hand, just the traditional way headphones were created in the beginning. Mm-hmm. No flashy stuff, no amazing colors, nothing. And they still do it and people still pay for that value. And I think we're going to experience that stuff in the next 2 to 3 years with WordPress.
Now, so I want to kind of take it on the other end of the spectrum. We've been talking about kind of the small business side, smaller sites, site builders, but let's talk about enterprise. Let's talk about the larger scale of WordPress, which is an area that, to your point earlier on, Matt, that we've been preaching for years, that WordPress is a great option for the enterprise. It can compete with things like Sitecore and Adobe Experience Manager and some of the others. There's definitely, again, been some change in the economics of that as well. We work with a lot of enterprise clients, and by and large, they love WordPress. I also know of clients, some that were ours, some that weren't ours, but I just know what they did, where they've been on WordPress and now they're switching off of it. Like they had a WordPress run for a while, and now they decide, we're going to try something different. And maybe they're going with Adobe or Sitecore or whatever. But the question is, like, is WordPress in the enterprise? Is that still a fit? Is that still an option? And if so, how are the economics of that changing?
I mean, I can only tell you from my perspective, very seldom, although coincidentally, a couple of weeks ago, I did get on the phone with a big brand, and they were thinking about WordPress, and they were asking some baseline questions about WordPress, like, can we integrate our e-commerce into posts? And if we want to have many posts, how do we do that? And it was very much like custom post type territory. And a lot of it had to do with how they architected their WordPress site. So I can only speak for the people who are coming to me who want WordPress. And most of those customers that are coming to us are just getting away from the confines of closed source software or like software that's just going to cost them a ridiculous amount. And generally it's powered by their marketing teams to just be able to move faster, right? Some of the times I talk to people and they're like, yeah, we've got this Adobe CMS, but guess what? When I need to spin up a new site, I have to get another license and I have to go through the whole purchasing thing. And that's just for one site, but we want to launch like 50 product sites. Like it's just not feasible for us to do that. And with WordPress, we can do it so much faster. So the people that I'm talking to, like they are sold on WordPress for the most part, again, like just being in this space now, I see it more often that bigger businesses are investing in it, and I'm seeing less of the smaller businesses dealing with it now. It could be because I'm out of that world a little bit, but people are, at least from what I see, people are moving to it. And it's a good thing, but people do. I'd say 50% of these people who are in tune to the market, they ask me about what happens when this Gutenberg thing rolls out.
Sure.
And there is concern. Right.
Well,
there is
a question.
So thinking about these kind of bigger companies looking at possible using WordPress, and somebody will go, oh, WordPress is just an open source software, and you're still going to need to pay somebody $100,000 or $200,000 to go and build your site and maintain your site, on an annual basis. And I think about that compared to something like an Adobe solution or another solution where, here's the thing, just because you go with that Adobe solution doesn't mean that you don't need a developer who's going to do all of that stuff for you anyway. So not only are you still going to pay that $100,000 a year to get your site built, you now also have the licensing fee from Adobe for another $100,000 a year on top of it. So, I think that the WordPress solution makes a heck of a lot of sense monetarily. And, Gutenberg right now, if you think about it, think about Gutenberg in 3 years. You're not even going to use the word Gutenberg. It's just going to be WordPress. And no matter what the pain point is, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off here probably in the next couple of months. And a couple of months after that, you're going to almost forget about it. And you're going to just continue to build solutions. You're smart people. We're going to figure it out. And we'll just kind of work around it. If you look at the way page builders work right now, if you install Gutenberg and a page builder, it's kind of almost like an either or thing. I'm either going to mess with my content in the Gutenberg experience, or I'm going to mess with it on that front end page builder experience. And I think the two are going to probably live cohesively. That's my guess. Fingers crossed.
I think I mean, that's what we all hope, right? You know,
Yeah.
I think for me, I think the biggest challenge WordPress has in the enterprise space is these larger platforms, and essentially that's who we're going up against. You know, so we mentioned Adobe, we mentioned Sitecore, even Drupal to an extent. You know, the challenge is there is no kind of okay, imagine this scenario. You know, my company goes into a major enterprise level company, sits down, pitches WordPress, pitches our services, what we can do, why WordPress is the best thing in the world. Great. They love it. They love WordPress. Think it looks great, you know. And then that afternoon or the next day, you know, Adobe comes marching in and pitches Adobe Experience Manager and has who knows how many people sitting around that table and what their degrees and their you know decades and decades of experience are around platforms and technologies. Those are the people we're up against, you know. So we'll never be as big or have the marketing or sales budgets as, you know, companies like a Sitecore or an AEM to go in there and really sell licensing products, those SaaS models. And even Drupal was interesting because Drupal, yes, is open source, but there's also Akia, which is essentially what WordPress is severely missing. And that company's entire focus is the SaaS model of Drupal for the enterprise. And they have, you know, hundreds and millions in funding to make that happen behind that company, where it is, you know, Automatic is obviously involved extensively. WordPress is their core, but there's only a very small fraction of that kind of focused on the enterprise, which is really the VIP side of WordPress.com. So that to me is one of the biggest challenges. How do agencies go up against some of these behemoth companies and actually come out getting WordPress to win?
Right. And it's not, and I'd even argue that a lot of these companies, it's not about price because they have the money. They have no problem spending it for the most part. It's are the people around that table, do they feel like they're making the right decision so they don't get fired, right, from people above them? And really where WordPress wins is just the agility, right, of the platform, of being able to just roll things out way faster. And in the corporate world, everything takes freaking forever. So if they can deploy sites and save them, you know, a whole month worth of just buying more licenses, doing the paperwork, getting all the legal stuff done, implementing another server because that's what it requires. If they can shave that time off, that's where, you know, WordPress really wins, at least just from the conversations that I've had, both in the agency space and now with Pagely.
Do you also think that along those same lines, just with the sheer amount of available consultants around WordPress?
I mean, you know, in the enterprise or the big business, that, you know, they certainly don't look at that, right? They're not going to hire a freelancer. They might hire an agency, or they will hire an agency. But I'd say it's a mixed bag. Of the people that I talk to are in-house staff, 50% in-house staff that they're just going to do it themselves, and 50% are seeking, you know, somebody like a Web Dev Studios to help them out. But I don't really hear people talk about it from that angle. Like they're like, well, you know, this is great because we can just go hire people. I think they realize that maybe, and they're just doing it because they can move faster with it.
Mm-hmm. Good points. I mean, I think we all know, obviously we are drinking, have been drinking the WordPress Kool-Aid for a while now, but we know WordPress is a great platform. It could certainly support a good majority of the enterprise needs out there. It's not going to be the perfect fit for everything. We all know that, right? There's plenty of applications that maybe WordPress isn't the best fit for, but by and large, WordPress is a great fit for everything from very small one-person personal sites all the way up to these enterprise level, these enterprise level companies. So I think it's just a lot of it's education. A lot of it is selling it on the points, like you said, agility and be able to move fast. I think that is a very great point to bring out. But it's something we need to constantly be thinking about, because again, the whole kind of overarching message, I think, of this episode and this conversation is that things aren't going to stay the same, and they're going to change and they're going to evolve. And we know this, right? This is technology, and technology evolves so fast, like it's absolutely mind blowing sometimes. So just like technology changes, so is the landscape of the technology that we're using. And what, you know, different people are looking for and what's going to be ultimately the best solution for them. So, but I do think it is important to have these conversations as, you know, hopefully it doesn't come across totally bleak, because I don't think that's the case at all. I think WordPress is still doing great. But again, if we ignore it and we're not discussing it and talking about it, we could blanket it. Next thing we know, WordPress is on the downslide, and we've been passed.
Yeah.
So,
and hey, you wouldn't want it to still be the exact same as it was 13 years ago, right?
no.
Nope.
Absolutely. We'd all still have 100% Flash websites if that was the case.
Oh, man.
Change is not always a bad thing. It's just we need to change it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, I think I said we're going for 30 minutes, and here we are at the hour mark. So probably time to wrap it up. But I definitely appreciate you both being on the show today. Why don't you guys tell everyone where they can find you online? John, you want to kick it off?
VegasGeek.com, ewebscapes.com, webdevstudios.com. Anything that ends with at VegasGeek.com.
All right.
Anything at .com will work.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Maybe Vegas.
What about you, Matt?
That was the fastest hour I've ever done on a podcast. It was a great conversation. It's mattreport.com and pagely.com.
Awesome. And I am Brad. You can find me Williams BA on Twitter, webdevstudios.com. Like John said, I about said Brad. I don't know why that said that. But this has been another episode of Lunch with Brad. We'll be back in 2 weeks. So check the hashtag Lunch with Brad. And this will be on the website, lunchwithbrad.com. Share it around. I'd love to get your thoughts, feedback, opinions. And my guess is we'll be talking about this again and continuing to discuss this. So great conversation. Awesome time. Thanks for joining, guys. And with that, we are outie.
Here it comes.
Lunch with Brad. Come on, man. Where are you at? Lunch with
Brad. Lunch with Brad.